Friends, I need to warn you. The scripture that Oliver is about to read is one of the most horrific stories of our faith. And I think the last time Oliver read scripture, he also had a brutal text. Oliver, I promise the whole Bible isn't all violence. I mean, a lot of it is, but not the whole thing. Today we are beginning a mini worship series on the story of Noah's Ark, and the story is devastating. Just about everything living is drowning, all creation is filling up with water, and all the water is filling up with bloated corpses. People and animals are choking and gasping for breath, and can you even imagine the smell? To make matters worse, as the story goes in Genesis, it was the Lord our God who decided to wipe out the world. What happened was that God looked at the world and loved the world, but this time, instead of seeing how it was very good, God saw the cruelty of humankind, and it brought him to tears. He was sorry that he made human people. So God made the same call that every artist has to make at some point. This isn't working. Time to scrap it and start over. This is the potter smushing down the clay on the wheel in order to recenter it. This is the writer seeing what she wrote and then ripping the page out of the notebook and crumbling it into a ball. Now, the people who invented this Bible story were human, and maybe they were wrong about God. Or maybe they are showing me something of God I don't especially want to see. We know there is evil that pours through the earth. Violence is not inevitable, but it has been part of our story from the beginning. So it challenges my faith to consider, what if God is the one waging this violence? What if God knows about torture and genocide and poverty and simply chooses not to intervene? Even worse, what if there is some part of God that actually wants this suffering? Now, I mean, that's not something I believe, not at all. It's just, this is the problem. When it comes to the flood, did God want it to happen? When it comes to whatever is our own world-erasing flood, when it comes to a COVID diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis or a shooting or an accident, you might hear this question rise up in your own heart. You might hear yourself asking, did God want this to happen to me? As it turns out, the Great Flood was a common story in the ancient world. So different cultures each tell their own version in their own way. And in the Babylonian story of Gilgamesh, instead of one god, there's a whole divine assembly. This council decides to exterminate humanity by waging a flood, which sounds familiar. But in this version, one of the gods, Ea, opposes the plan. He cooks up a scheme to sabotage it by sneaking over to a man named Utnapishtim, and Ea whispers the threat to him, "And you didn't hear it from me," says Ea. Ea tells Utnapishtim, you're going to need to tear down your house, build a barge, then take specimens of every creature, your entire household, pick up your whole life, and board the boat. Then Nergal, divine patron of the dead, unlocked the fountain of the deep, and the gods flooded all of everything, so the heavens could not even see the earth. But Utnapishtim and his household managed to live. It sounds pretty familiar to our story, but instead of a conflicted council of gods, our story has only one God. But our God is also conflicted. Remember, the Lord looked at the world and loved the world, and God saw how the hearts of the people were turned toward evil. And when she saw this, she wept. From the despair in her own heart, God decided to wipe out the world and start all over again. But here's the thing. What about Noah? Noah walked with God. So here, God is ready to extinguish everything living. And then she remembered Noah. And now God is going to need a new plan. Our story today raises the question that keeps raising up. Did God want this violence to happen? And maybe we could just leave that question ringing. Today's story shows us there is something in God that is grieving because of the horror in our world, because of the violence and the warfare. There's something in God that keeps longing to turn the world toward love and more love. And all through the stories of our faith, God keeps coming into the chaos. And what if the Lord, our God, has something of Ea in them? What if God is cooking up a scheme? As we hear the story Oliver is reading, will you join me in paying attention to what God chooses to do while the horror is raging? Because I think we're about to see God is not finished creating the world. May it be so.